So we're going to start today getting into the actual text of the Gospel of Matthew. And we are going to begin with the prologue to Matthew's Gospel. So this is Matthew chapter 1, verses 1 to 17. And Matthew chapter 1, verse 1 simply reads, "The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David and the son of Abraham." So again, from our introductory comments, you might recall that I said the major theme of the Gospel of Matthew is to show how Jesus is this Messiah King that God had promised and that was foretold in the prophets and the Psalms and the other scriptures of the Old Testament, how he is the fulfillment of all of this. This is the King they've been waiting for. And so Matthew begins his genealogy by pointing out that Jesus is the son of David. He is of the lineage of Israel's great king David. Then Matthew calls Jesus the son of Abraham. Such an important title because it is to Abraham that God makes the promise that he will have this overabundance of descendants, children from generation to generation. And this promise is ultimately fulfilled in Christ. An anonymous Christian writer from this time says the following about Abraham concerning this verse. "Abraham was the father of the faithful, and when God wished him to be an example for the virtuous, he said to him, 'Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to that land that I will show you.'" That's Genesis 12:1. The writer continues, "So that all who should wish to be the sons of Abraham might know how to receive that living land of promise, it was written, 'I believe that I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living.'" And that's Psalm 27:13 or 26:13 in the Septuagint. God is repeatedly sending his people to places that they do not know, places they didn't want to go in the case of Jonah, or calling them to do things and telling them that things will unfold in their lives that don't make any sense to them. And by doing these things, trusting in God's providence, even though they were unexpected and incomprehensible in some cases, by doing them anyway, their lives were changed for the better. And indeed, so was the entire course of human history. And if we think that being a disciple is only about things unfolding as we expect them to, we are in for a massive surprise, because God is always asking his faithful to go places and to do things that surprise them, things unexpected and even things we don't understand. And again, just like our holy forebears, we trust his providence and we move forward knowing that he always holds us in the hollow of his hand and that where he leads us is ultimately part of the journey to his kingdom. The next part of the genealogy, verses 2 to 16, is a series of begots, that somebody becomes the father of somebody else, or they beget somebody else. When we talk about this idea of begetting or becoming the father of, this does not necessarily mean to be a biological father. Sometimes there are generations between the two people, the one who begets the other one. What this is talking about is a spiritual lineage, a spiritual legacy. Now, among the people listed, we discover 3 women, and this was kind of surprising for these genealogies because at the time, genealogy was about the father, it was about the male lineage. You didn't really need to factor the women in. I understand that's not how we talk now, and I understand that women were very important in the history of God's people. I'm not saying they weren't. I'm simply saying that in the Jewish culture, in these genealogies, it was about the men. So naming these 3 women was kind of unexpected. The other unexpected thing is that all of these women were Gentiles. And if that's not enough, all these 3 women also have these questionable histories. And all of this, that they're Gentiles and that they have these difficult pasts, this is Matthew trying to convey the idea that those who have the possibility of becoming citizens of the kingdom that Jesus proclaims are not just the people of Israel, and are not just the people who might be considered the ones getting things right in their lives. All people have the possibility of becoming citizens of God's kingdom through Christ, regardless of our lineage, regardless of our personal histories. The hope of salvation and access to the kingdom that Jesus comes to inaugurate is for all people. And the other thing we note here, as a result of these questionable histories, is the fact that Christ enters into our humanity as it is under the tyranny of sin and shame and death. Christ enters into the depth of our infirmity. Although he himself did not sin, that's a very important point made in the letter to the Hebrews, but he enters into this in order to heal it by his grace. And again, salvation is framed as an act of healing. When we get to verse 16, the pattern of these begots, it breaks. So verse 16 says, Jacob became the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus, who is called Christ. So when we get to Joseph, there's a shift from being an active participant in this lineage to being a secondary figure. Joseph does not beget. He does not become the father of Jesus. He is listed as the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus is born. And it is a very ancient teaching in the church that Joseph was Jesus' foster father and the guardian of Jesus and his mother. That was his role in God's plan for salvation. In verse 17, we have this interesting little bit of math. It says, and so all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations. From David to the exile to Babylon, 14 generations. And from the exile to Babylon until the Christ, 14 generations. And the fathers point out that 3 times 14 is 42. So if Christ is generation 1 and Abraham is generation 42, that means there are 40 generations between Abraham, who gets the promise, and Christ, through whom that promise is fulfilled. And in the scriptures, the number 40 is a symbolic number that signifies fulfillment, completion, or the transition from one thing to another. What we're getting here with these 40 generations between Abraham and Jesus is that Christ comes when the time is right. It's what Paul says in the letter to the Galatians, that in the fullness of time, God sends forth his Son. And so at that moment, at that point in history, it is the right time. Everything is ready. All the spiritual and the temporal conditions are right for him to send his Son. And God fulfills his promise to Abraham with the birth of Jesus. A king is born from the house of David. And through that king, all people have the possibility of becoming heirs to his kingdom that shall have no end.
Thanks for listening to this episode of my podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Eastern Orthodox Christianity, but aren't near an Orthodox church, you might be interested in the Fellowship of St. Theophan the Recluse, an online community for seekers and inquirers, all in that same situation. We have members in the U.S., Latin America, the British Isles, Africa, and Australia. For more information, message me or send me an email. Until next time, take care, and God bless.